Ladies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome once again to the next exciting and thrilling, astounding and amazing, ebullient and effervescent, saturnine and taciturn yet loquacious and jovial, reprehensible, vehement, vituperative, vitriolic episode of the Reading Cow from Another World thing show that this is, with the next installment of Jokes in Their Relation to the Unconscious by Sigmund Freud. Okay. For those of you that are familiar with Freud, I'd just like to make a few comments. You may be thinking, oh, he's being coy. I think he is being a little bit coy. He has this idea that something is sort of taboo to say in a certain situation. And so it gets repressed, but then it slips out, right? So, like last time I noticed, I was listening to my recording, and I noted when he was talking about Hyacinth was talking about he was treated familiarly by Rothschild. I noticed that I said he was created, I think created instead of treated. And I thought about it. Was that a Freudian slip? It's like it's sort of a leveling thing. Oh, I'm going to resolve the tension of this great split between the lowly worker and the great rich nobility by creating him familiar. But on the other hand, you're probably gonna be thinking, well, Freud is imagining that it's this slipping out of the truth that's going to be part of the humor element. But who knows? We'll just have to see. So without further ado, we'll continue. The process which has converted the thought into a joke can then be represented in the following manner, which may at first sight seem fantastic, but nevertheless produces precisely the outcome that is really before us. R treated me quite familiar, that is, so far as a millionaire can. Let us now imagine that a compressing force is brought to bear on these sentences, and that for some reason the second is the less resistant one. It is thereupon made to disappear, while its most important constituent, the word millionaire, which has converted, is nothing going to go right for me today. Let's see. Which has succeeded in rebelling against being suppressed, is, as it were, pushed up against the first sentence, infused with the element of that sentence which is so much like it, familiar. And the chance possibility which thus arises of saving the essential part of the second sentence actually favors the dissolution of its other, less important constituents. The joke is thus generated. R treated me quite familiar. If we leave out of account any such compressing force, which indeed is unknown to us, the process by which the joke is formed, that is, the joke technique in this instance, might be described as condensation, accompanied by the formation of a substitute, and in the present example of the formation of the substitute consists in the making of a composite word. This composite word, familiar, which is unintelligible in itself, but is immediately understood in its context and recognized as being full of meaning, is the vehicle of the joke's laughter-compelling effect, the mechanism of which, however, is not made in any way clearer by our discovery of the joke technique. In what way can a linguistic process of condensation accompanied by the formation of a substitute by means of a composite word give us pleasure and make us laugh? This is evidently a different problem, whose treatment we may postpone till we have found a way of approaching it. For the present, we will keep to the technique of jokes. Our expectation that the technique of jokes cannot be a matter of indifference from the point of view of discovering their essence leads us at once to inquire whether there are other examples of jokes constructed like Heine's Familionaire. There are not very many of them, but nevertheless enough to make up a small group which are characterized by the formation of composite words. Heine himself has derived a second joke from the word millionaire, copying from himself, as it were. In chapter 14 of his Ideen, he speaks of a millionaire, which is an obvious combination of millionaire and nar, and, just as in the first example, brings out a suppressed subsidiary thought. There it is, folks. Suppression. Here are some other examples I have come upon. There is a certain fountain, Brunnen, in Berlin, the erection of which brought the chief Burgermeister, Forkenbeck, Forkenbeck, into much disfavor. The Berliners call it the Forkenbecken, and there is certainly a joke in this description, even though it was necessary to replace the word Brunnen by its obsolete equivalent Becken, in order to combine it into a whole with the name of the Burgermeister. The Voice of Europe once made the cruel joke of changing a potentate's name from Leopold to Cleopold, on account of the relations he had had at one time with a lady with the first name of Cleo. This undoubted product of condensation keeps alive an annoying allusion at the cost of a single letter. Proper names in general fall easy victims to this kind of treatment by the joke technique. There were in Vienna two brothers named Salinger, one of whom was a Borsinsal. This provided a handle for calling him Sinsalinger, while his brother, to distinguish him, was given the unflattering name of Schuhsalinger. This was convenient and certainly a joke. I cannot say whether it was justified, but jokes do not as a rule inquire much into that. No, that's the German for fool. Okay, and Schussel means a monstrous creature. Okay. I have been told the following condensation joke. A young man who had hitherto led a gay life abroad paid a call after a considerable absence on a friend living here. The latter was surprised to see an Ehering wedding ring on his visitor's hand. "What?" he exclaimed. "Are you married?" "Yes," was the reply, "trowering but true." The joke is an excellent word. The word trowering combines both components Ehering, changed into trowering, and the sentence traurig aber wahr, sad but true. The effect of the joke is not interfered with by the fact that here the composite word is not like familionaire, an unintelligible and otherwise non-existent structure, but one which coincides entirely with one of the two elements represented. In the course of conversation, I myself once unintentionally provided the material for a joke that is once again quite analogous to familionaire. I was talking to a lady about the great services that had been rendered by a man of science who I considered had been unjustly neglected. "Why," she said, "the man deserves a monument." "Perhaps he will get one some day," I replied, "but momentan he has very little success." Monument and momentan are opposites. The lady proceeded to unite them. "Well, let us wish him a monumentan success." A non-existing word, monumental, as in English, would have been expected. Traurig would have meant sad. Trauring is a synonym for Ehering. Okay, it's sad but true. Okay, I owe a few examples in foreign languages which show the same mechanism of condensation as our familionaire. to an excellent discussion of the same subject in English by A.A. Brilli, B-R-I-L-I, 1911. The English author De Quincey, is it Brill? De Quincey, Brill tells us, B-R-I-L-L, sorry about that, tells us somewhere, remarked that old people are inclined to fall into their anecdotage. This word is a fusion of the partly overlapping words anecdote and dotage. In an anonymous short story, Brill once found the Christmas season described as the alcoholidays, a similar fusing of alcohol and holidays. After Flaubert had published his celebrated novel Salammbô, the scene of which is laid in ancient Carthage, Sainte-Beuve laughed at it on account of its elaboration of detail as being Carthaginoiserie, Carthaginois, and chinoiserie. But the best example of a joke of this group originated from one of the leading men of Austria who, after important scientific and public work, now fills one of the highest offices in the state. I have ventured to make use of the jokes which are ascribed to him, and all of which, in fact, bear the same impress as material for these researches. Above all, because it would have been hard to find any better. Herr N's attention was drawn one day to the figure of a writer who had become well known from a series of undeniably boring essays which he had contributed to a Vienna daily paper. All of these essays dealt with small episodes in the relations of the first Napoleon with Austria. The author had red hair. As soon as Herr N heard his name mentioned, he asked, "Is not that the Roter Faden that runs through the story of the Napoleonids?" Okay, for the first note, have I the right to do so? At least I have not obtained my knowledge of these jokes through an indiscretion. They are generally known in the city Vienna and are to be found in everyone's mouth. A number of them have been given publicity by Edward Hanslick in Neue Freie Presse, and in his autobiography. As regards the others, I must offer my apologies for any possible distortions, which in the case of oral tradition are scarcely to be avoided. 2. Roter means red. Scarlet. Fadian means dull fellow. The termination ion is occasionally added to an adjective, giving the somewhat contemptuous sense of fellow. Thus, grob means coarse. Grobian means a coarse fellow. Dum means stupid. Dumian means a stupid fellow. The adjective fade or fad means, like its French equivalent, insipid, dull. Finally, faden means thread. In order to discover the technique of this joke, we must apply to it the process of reduction, which gets rid of the joke by changing the mode of expression and instead introducing the original complete meaning, which can be inferred with certainty from a good joke. Herr N's joke about the Roter Faden proceeds from the two components, a depreciatory judgment upon the writer and a recollection of the famous simile with which Goethe introduces the extracts from Attili's diary in the, this is a hard one, folks, Wahlverwandtschaften. The ill-tempered criticism may have run, so this is the person who is forever and ever writing nothing but boring stories about Napoleon and Austria. Now this remark is not in the least a joke, nor is Goethe's pretty analogy a joke, and it is certainly not calculated to make us laugh. It is only when the two are brought into connection with each other and submitted to the peculiar process of condensation and fusion that a joke emerges, and a joke of the first order. Note 1. We hear of a peculiar practice in the English Navy. Every rope in the King's fleet, from the strongest to the weakest, is woven in such a way that a roterfaden, scarlet thread, runs through its whole length. It cannot be extracted without undoing the whole rope, and it proves that even the smallest piece is crown property. In just the same way, a thread of affection and dependence runs through Attili's diary, binding it all together and characterizing the whole of it. Goethe, Sophienhausgabe 2212. Note 2. I need hardly point out how little this observation, which can invariably be made, fits in with the assertion that a joke is a playful judgment. The linking of the disparaging judgment upon the boring historian with the pretty analogy Wahlverwandtschaften must have taken place for reasons which I cannot yet make intelligible. In a less simple manner than in many similar cases, I shall try to represent what was probably the actual course of events by the following construction. First, the element of the constant recurrence of the same theme in the stories may have awoken a faint recollection in the familiar passage in the Wahlverwandtschaften, which is, as a rule, wrongly quoted. It runs like a roter Faden, scarlet thread. The roter Faden of the analogy now exercised a modifying influence on the expression of the first sentence as a result of the chance circumstance that the person insulted was also rot, red, that is to say, had red hair. It may then have run, so it is that red person who writes the boring stories, about Napoleon. And now the process began which brought about the condensation of the two pieces, under its pressure, which had found its first fulcrum in the sameness of the element rot. The boring was assimilated to the Faden thread and was changed into Fad dull. After this, the two components were able to fuse together into the actual text of the joke, in which, in this case, the quotation has an almost greater share than the derogatory judgment, which was undoubtedly present alone to begin with. So it is that red person who writes this fad stuff about Napoleon. The red faden that runs through everything. Is not that the red faden that runs through the story of the Napoleonids? Ha ha ha. Ba-dum-bum. Okay. In a later chapter, I shall add a justification, but also a correction to this account when I come to analyze this joke from the points of view other than purely formal ones. But whatever else about it may be in doubt, there can be no question that a condensation has taken place. The result of the condensation is, on the one hand, once again, a considerable abbreviation, but on the other hand, instead of the formation of a striking composite word, there is an interpenetration of the two constituents of the two components. It is true that Roterfaden would be capable of existing as a mere term of abuse, but in our instance, it is certainly a product of condensation. If at this point a reader should become indignant at a method of approach which threatens to ruin his enjoyment of jokes without being able to throw any light on the source of that enjoyment, I would beg him to be patient for the moment. At present, we are only dealing with the technique of jokes, and the investigation even of this promises results, if we pursue it sufficiently far. The analysis of the last example has prepared us to find that if we meet with the process of condensation and still other examples, the substitute for what is suppressed may be not a composite structure, but some other alteration of the form of expression. We can learn what this other form of substitute may be from another of Herr N's jokes. I drove with him tete-a-bete. Nothing can be easier than the reduction of this joke. Clearly, it can only mean I drove with X tete-a-tete. That is a stupid ass. X is a stupid ass. And X is a stupid ass. Neither of these sentences is a joke. They could be put together. I drove with that stupid ass X tete-a-tete. And that is not a joke either. The joke only arises if the stupid ass is left out. And as a substitute for it, the T in one tete is turned into a B. With this slight modification, the suppressed ass has nevertheless once more found expression. He's hinting at the Freudian slip, right? Something hidden that accidentally gets revealed with a slip of the tongue. Okay. The technique of this group of jokes can be described as condensation accompanied by slight modification, and it may be suspected that the slighter the modification, the better will be the joke. The technique of another joke is similar, though not without its complication. In the course of a conversation about someone in whom there was much to praise, but much to find fault with, Heron remarked, "Yes, vanity is one of his 4 Achilles heels." In this case, the slight modification consists in the fact that instead of the 1 Achilles heel which the hero himself must have possessed, 4 are here in question. 4 heels, but only an ass has 4 heels. Thus, the 2 thoughts that are condensed in the joke ran, apart from his vanity, why is an eminent man? All the same, I don't like him, he's an ass rather than a man. Okay, footnote added in 1912. It seems that this joke was applied earlier by Heine to Alfred de Musset. Note 2. One of the complications in the technique of this example lies in the fact that the modification by which the omitted insult is replaced must be described as an allusion to the latter, since it only leads to it by a process of inference. For another factor that complicates the technique here, see below. I happened to hear another similar but much simpler joke in Statu Nascendi in a family circle. Of 2 brothers at school, one was excellent and the other a most indifferent scholar. Now it happened once that the exemplary boy too came to grief at school, and their mother referred to this while expressing her concern that it might mean the beginning of a lasting deterioration. The boy, who had hitherto been overshadowed by his brother, readily grasped the opportunity. "Yes," he said, "Carl's going backwards on all 4s." The modification here consists in a short addition to the assurance that he too was of the opinion that the other boy was going backwards. But this modification represented and replaced a passionate plea on his own behalf. "You mustn't think he's so much cleverer than I am simply because he's more successful at school. After all, he's only a stupid ass. That's to say, much stupider than I am." Another well-known joke of Herr Inn's offers a neat example of condensation with slight modification. He remarked of a personage in public life, "He has a great future behind him." The man to whom this joke referred was comparatively young, and he had seemed destined by his birth, education, and personal qualities to succeed in the future to the leadership of a great political party and to enter the government at its head. But times changed, the party became inadmissible as a government, and it could be foreseen that the man who had been predestined to be its leader would come to nothing as well. He has a great future behind him. The shortest reduced version by which this joke could be replaced would run, "The man has had a great future before him, but he has it no longer," instead of the "had" in the second clause. There was merely the small change made in the principal clause by replacing before by its contrary, behind. Note, there is another factor operating in the technique of this joke, which I reserve for later discussion. It concerns the actual nature of the modification representation by the opposite or by something absurd. There is nothing to prevent the joke technique from simultaneously employing several methods, but these we can only get to know one by one. Herein made use of almost the same modification in the case of a gentleman who became Minister for Agriculture with the sole qualification of being himself a farmer. Public opinion had occasion to recognize that he was the least gifted holder of the office that there had ever been. When he had resigned his office and retired to his farming interest, Heron said of him, "Like Cincinnatus, he has gone back to his place before the plow." The Roman, however, who had also been called away to office from the plow, returned to his place behind the plow. What went before the plow, both then and today, was only an ox. Karl Kraus was responsible for another successful condensation with slight modification. He wrote of a certain yellow press journalist that he had traveled to one of the Balkan states by Orienterpressung. There is no doubt that this word combines two others, Orient Expressung, the Orient Express, and Erpressung, blackmail, Owing to the context, the element Erpressung emerges only as a modification of the Orient Expressung, a word called for by the verb traveled. This joke, which presents itself in the guise of a misprint, has yet another claim on our interest. Ladies and gentlemen, that brings us once again to the next thrilling and amazing, astounding and exciting chapter of the section of the next episode of the Reading Cow from Another World, and so on and so forth, with jokes and their relation to the unconscious by Sigmund Freud, part 2. Until next time, goodbye.